This is the third part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do. The Archbishop asks the king if the bastard is worth all those dead heroes, to which the king responds that the testimony of the religious figure will determine the outcome of the war. Therefore, he will ensure that it is won fairly so that he can inform the church. And Irene takes off her armor while she sees that the king's army has finally arrived. Then we see the scene where the story began, where the king tells the girl to think about her followers, as she has no chance of winning. Irene lies wounded on the ground, and the king tells her that he will spare her life if she renounces her claim to the throne of her house. But she responds that his promises no longer hold credibility, and she finds it amusing that he says it given the state of the kingdom, and that the crown does not secure the rights of the king of the Becher house despite his promise to do so. The king tells her that she is not the king, but her brother, and that she has no choice, as he will not break his word in front of thousands of people. So Irene orders her soldiers to lower their weapons. They tell her that they can still fight and ask her to allow them to accompany her to the end. But she responds that it is no longer necessary, as the winner has already been decided, and there is no need for further unnecessary losses. So she releases them from the debt to her family that brought them to the battlefield. And she tells her generals that this is her final order, and they all obey and drop their weapons. Irene thinks that everyone has been freed from their commitment to her, when suddenly she remembers the protagonist and says that it's probably good that he's not there. She thanks them for being with her and tells them that the next battle will be hers alone. Then she stands up and tells the king that she won't back down, as her home is behind her. And amidst the confusion of his troops, she charges at him, saying that she will fight until her life ends. The king calls her foolish and tells his soldiers to prepare, when suddenly they hear someone reciting the virtues of chivalry. Irene stops because she recognizes the voice, and when she looks up, she realizes that it's the protagonist with a group of knights. This scares the king's army, and after reaffirming his loyalty to Irene, the protagonist orders his forces to charge. Catherine finds this amusing because when all humans had given up on their promise, a small Lich keeps it, and she wonders what will be the protagonist's end. Moments before, we see the children waiting outside the city walls, wondering why the protagonist hasn't returned yet. There, the cleric thinks that he admires him because he took them out of the city and went alone to chase the imposter, and he says he should learn from him when suddenly a knight appears riding alongside him. Startled, the cleric wonders what the cavalry is doing there, especially since his armor doesn't belong to either the White City or the king's army, and within seconds, they see themselves surrounded by knights. So he thinks he must come up with an excuse to protect the children. But then one of the children says they are on their side because they bear the silver moon emblem on their clothes, so it must be the protagonist, who then appears and tells them he's back and has brought armor and war horses with him. So he asks the children if they are ready to go into battle, and they say they are. Concerned, the cleric asks him if he will really take them to fight. Then the protagonist tells him yes because he promised to do so, and a knight never breaks a promise. We return to the present, where the protagonist and the children charge against the army, and the king wonders what so few knights can do. So he calls his own knights and orders them to attack. The soldiers on the city walls realize the arrival of the protagonist and say they are saved because he didn't escape. Both forces are about to face each other, and we see Catherine asking Professor Abbott if the protagonist can win, and he tells her it's impossible because his magic will run out against 100,000 men. She admits it's true, and that's what surprises her because even knowing that his opponent is invincible, the protagonist keeps striving. The cat tells the protagonist that he thought he would bring the army of undead, but he only brought the children, so he's a crazy bastard. The protagonist tells him it's because the Holy Spirit told him that he doesn't need an army of undead to participate in the war. And the cat complains that it's actually because the undead were unstable, and asks if he really believes he can win against the king's army. At that moment, the children start losing control of their horses, so the protagonist uses a massive blessing to strengthen them. This surprises Catherine, and the children feel empowered. The Archbishop is also surprised because what the protagonist did is a miracle that only a paladin can use. And Catherine says that the protagonist keeps moving forward, even though she knows he's not invincible. The Golden Knights try to stop the protagonist and his order, but they easily overpower them because they are immune to swords and spears. The cat worries because the miracle set them on fire, and they are going to die. And the protagonist replies that it's just a revelation from the Holy Spirit. The cat warns him that it will burn them to death and asks if he doesn't care what happens to them. But the horse also says that it will fight with the sacred light, and the cat suffers for being the only normal one in that team. The king wonders why there is a paladin under Iron's command when he hears one of the citizens start cheering for the protagonist. Shelley joins him, as well as the citizens who tried to humiliate him in the past and all of Iron's army, who proclaim it to be a miracle. Abbott mocks the humans for believing that, but Catherine tells him that's what they taught them, that when evil consumed the land, heroes bathed in light would appear to save the world. Suddenly, Catherine materializes in front of the protagonist and asks if he remembers her. The protagonist does, so the girl tells him she will help him and imbues an angelic mark on his chest that stops the flames. The protagonist asks if the Holy Spirit recognizes him, and Catherine tells him not yet, but now he has the approval of an angel. The archbishop dismounts his horse, saying he is the guardian angel of the paladins, and since it's a miracle, it's not a war sanctioned by the Holy Spirit. This worries the king, who tells his soldiers that it doesn't matter because they are just a few and can crush them. But the archbishop stops him and tells him that now he has enough reasons to suspect that he started the war under the influence of dark forces. This leaves the king cornered, and he prepares to kill the archbishop, asking how he can ally himself with the enemy when he invited him. The protagonist realizes this, so he quickly jumps and moves the religious man away from the king's sword. Once safe, the protagonist asks if he's alright, which convinces the archbishop completely. He then shouts at the army that the king has been corrupted by darkness, and in the name of the Holy Spirit, he calls all devout knights to end this unjust war. They turn to look at the king, and he tells them not to look at him because the enemy is on the other side. Between the orders of the king and the archbishop, the knights and the army hesitate on whom to obey. Then we are told that in his youth, the king was known for his bravery. He commanded a great army and defeated the invaders from the neighboring kingdom of Alan despite being outnumbered. This made him the king of the kingdom of Isaac, and all the knights aspired to be like him. But every hero's legacy has an end. The archbishop insists that the soldiers lower their weapons, but they refuse because they have a promise to the king. But the religious leader tells them that promises do not include injustice, and asks them to look ahead, for they are fighting against the Holy Spirit itself. Then the clergyman shouts that if they insist on fighting, he will fight as well. And he tells everyone that the knights bravely accompanying the protagonist are only 12-year-old children. And if even they stand up for their land, the adults should not be afraid. This motivates the citizens, who say they should fight as well. And they begin to cry out for the Holy Spirit, which demoralizes the king's knights. Then one of the soldiers kneels and tells the king that he cannot continue fighting for him because, despite his promise, he cannot declare war on the Holy Spirit. And all the soldiers start dropping their weapons for the same reason. The king questions what they are doing and if the enemy's words are enough to weaken their loyalty. But then another knight kneels and says he also saw it, as the king was talking to a little girl with silver hair. And the army realizes that the king was corrupted and they were fighting an unjust war. So they turn to look at the king with looks of disdain, and he says not to see him that way, for he only wanted to live forever, and his own soldiers apprehend him. Catherine says it's all over, and the protagonist wonders if he won, to which the cat replies that yes, and that he is the best knight. Then the protagonist cuts through the army to reach Irene, before whom he kneels, and he apologizes for being late and not protecting her as he should have. But she smiles at him and tearfully says he appeared just at the perfect moment. So the forces of Irene erupt in celebration for the victory, as well as the people of the city. And Shelley says that this chivalrous drama finally had a perfect ending. It is told that during the Battle of the White City, the protagonist appeared for the first time in the history of humanity. He himself defeated the king's army of 100,000 men, which was a miracle in military history. After the battle, the king was stripped of the throne and awaited the papal verdict. The nobles who conspired with him were also captured and sanctioned with full support from the church. In this way, Irene officially inherited her father's title and became the Grand Duchess of the Becher House. Meanwhile, the protagonist became the second Earl of the new Becher Duchy in addition to Gregory. His feats spread to every corner of the continent, making him the role model for all knights and the ideal that every knight aspired to achieve. Months later, the archbishop reported to the church the causes and consequences of the Battle of the White City. He was then bestowed the title of Paladin, becoming the fifth on the entire continent. Meanwhile, in the capital of the kingdom, the struggle for the throne among the king's 12 children began. But none of that has much to do with the current White City. We see soldiers enjoying peace, happy that no one will dare to attack them now, all thanks to Irene and the protagonist. In that scene, we see her and her guards in her office, where none of them have slept due to all the hard work they had to take care of after the war. Horace asks the girl why they don't ask the protagonist for help, but she tells him that he couldn't handle the paperwork and she just hopes he doesn't get into trouble. Suddenly, one of the guards enters the office and tells her that the protagonist sold the castle he gave to Count Gregory, and is distributing gold to the people from the castle tower. This infuriates Irene, who says it's not right and that she will go see the protagonist, while her guards tell her to calm down and lower her sword. In a scene change, we see Catherine and Abbott presenting themselves in heaven before the Holy Spirit, who asks them about the fact that they helped a Lich. Catherine explains that it was solely her decision and that the protagonist would have died for his faith in the Holy Spirit if she hadn't intervened. And because of this, and his knightly spirit, she decided to commit to being his guardian angel. The spirit asks her if she's sure about it since a Lich can live as long as they do, and she swears by her angelic powers that she is. It is told that there was a heavy snowfall in the city, which gave people a moment of rest, while they enjoyed watching the protagonist have fun in the snow. The cat asks him why he is so excited, and the protagonist tells him that it's because it never snows underground. The cat scolds him for being a paladin and spending the whole day rolling around. The protagonist responds that's what he was told to do to attract people, and the cat tells him it's just a cat thing when people arrive to give the protagonist shelter and food. So the cat gets upset and, while running away, the protagonist accidentally collides with Shelley. She tells him that she would like to talk to him about something personal and asks if she could walk with him. The protagonist agrees and gives the girl a blanket for the cold. She says she heard that Irene gave him the port of Hamlet after selling the castle to her grandfather. But the protagonist doesn't remember, and the cat has to tell him again what happened. There we see the protagonist giving money to the people from the castle. Irene arrives and asks him if he really sold the castle. But when he tells her yes, she asks if he really needs the money. The protagonist tells her that it's not for him, but rather for the people and his knights. This makes Irene reflect that he only compensated the families of the deceased but ignored the productive situation of the society that was left without workers. And she thinks that the protagonist was only helping her with that. So she says that she will take care of it and will reassign him a fiefdom as compensation. This excites the protagonist and he runs towards her to hug her, but he forgets that he is wearing armor and hits her hard. Irene recovers and then asks the protagonist about his future plans. Since as a paladin, he has the right to a bigger stage than the Becher Duchy, and he could even go beyond the kingdom itself. But the protagonist tells her that he won't leave because he is her knight, and he will fulfill his promise to always follow her. This touches Irene, and she apologizes for doubting him, saying that she will also keep her promise and make sure he is not harmed in any way. This makes Shelley happy as it gives off a very good vibe. And then she asks him if he plans to become part of the Becher family. But the protagonist doesn't understand what she means and asks if it's a knight title. The cat stops him because the conversation is becoming very dangerous, and tells him that he will explain later, so he must repeat what he tells him. And the first thing is that he doesn't plan to join the Becher family, but he will always be his knight. Shelley understands and says that means she can be his partner, to which the protagonist casually agrees without thinking. So the cat hits him, and Shelley laughs because the protagonist responded so casually. And she says she won't bother him anymore, so she starts explaining the situation. We go back in time, where Gregory thought that the protagonist was only associated with the Sacred Order, but not that he was a paladin. And he asks Shelley if she knows what it means. He tells her that the protagonist doesn't have a surname and doesn't belong to any family, so he could become a Gregory. And he tells the girl that she knows what she has to do. So Shelley tells the protagonist that she was ordered to ask him for a secret date. So the cat thinks she's very weird for revealing those things in public. Shelley tells the protagonist that they just have to go shopping and eat together so she can go home. And although the protagonist doesn't understand, he gladly accepts. Shelley asks him if he really can, and if Irene didn't assign him anything to do. But the protagonist says she only ordered him to patrol and help anyone in need. So they start their date. They stroll through the city and try on clothes until they reach a dessert shop, where she recommends the house's flagship dish but asks if it's to the protagonist's liking, as he seems uncomfortable. He responds that it's not that, but rather he was thinking about how to eat it and thinks he needs to invent a magic spell to eat it as soon as possible. Suddenly, someone seems to recognize Shelley, and we see that it's a girl named Eliza, the eldest daughter of Duke Fernandez. Shelley asks her what brings her to the city, and she responds that it's for Irene's coronation. She also scolds Shelley, telling her she must stop behaving like a child running through the streets with nothing to do. She tells her it's not the case because she has a knight accompanying her. And Eliza responds that's good because she shouldn't do anything that brings shame to her family, and then she leaves. So Shelley relaxes. There, the protagonist asks her who she was, and the girl tells him she's a cousin of hers. We are told that, due to the relationship between their families, Eliza and Shelley practically grew up together. And we see that the former takes her friend to an abandoned mansion, which she calls a secret base. And they were very close until one day they started educating Eliza as a lady. Shelley tells her that her dress is cool, but her friend asks her not to make fun of her because she doesn't wear it because she wants to, and she doesn't understand why she has to wear it, as well as behave and speak in a sophisticated manner. Shelley asks her why she doesn't dress as she used to if she doesn't like it, and she responds that she's frustrated because she can't anymore, as through all those things, adults say that it maintains the dignity of the family. And we are told that since then, Eliza became completely aristocratic, like a brilliant and fragile ornament, which Shelley thinks is a boring life, and wonders if she will become like that in the future. But while reflecting on it, she says that the protagonist appeared. He takes her back to the Gregory house, and as he leaves, Shelley thinks he's magnificent, because interesting things always happen around him, and she considers telling him but regrets it not to bother him with her problems. In a scene change, a guard informs Iron that the battle for the throne has ended, and Prince Benedict too has seized the throne, so he made a royal decree inviting Iron, Gregory, and the protagonist to participate in his coronation ceremony. So the cat thinks something big is going to happen. Gregory wonders why he would be invited if Iron and the protagonist are already going, and Shelley tells him that it's because he's an ally of the Duchess, so surely the king wants to use his relationship with her. And Iron orders her followers to prepare to go to the capital and not let their guard down, even if it's a banquet. In a scene change, we see someone walking in the forest at night, where the two vampires are, but they see that it's the protagonist. Jones asks if he will kill him, and Dora says she won't let him lay a finger on him. But the protagonist says he didn't come for that, but to give them a gift, which is pieces of armor, and Jones asks what he's thinking. There, the protagonist tells them that they broke the treaty between heaven and vampires by killing humans in the forest, so Catherine has every right to execute them. However, with the privilege of being a paladin, he decided to forgive them on the condition that they must follow him until they cleanse their sins. Because if a Lich could become a paladin, vampires can too. And now they are part of his order of knights, so they will accompany him to the capital. It is told that Iron set off for the capital along with the protagonist and their delegation but got caught in fog halfway through the journey. Abby suggests that they should rest in the nearby village as it is dangerous to travel through the fog, and she agrees. However, the protagonist seems distracted. The cat points this out, and he responds that he feels strange around the fog when suddenly he falls off a cliff. The protagonist asks Tanitos if he's okay but realizes that he hasn't said anything during the trip. Then he hears Iron's voice calling for him, so he calls out to her as well. But when she appears, she behaves strangely, and the protagonist notices that she has changed her armor. Suddenly she draws her sword and attacks him, so he dodges and asks her what's going on. To which Iron replies that she no longer needs him, so he must disappear. Confused, the protagonist continues to dodge, and the cat tells him to kill her before she kills him, because after the war, she no longer needs him, and he will overshadow her with his position as a paladin, so she surely holds a grudge against him. The soldiers stab the protagonist, who says that Iron wouldn't think that way, and the cat insists that he defends himself, but the protagonist refuses because he made an oath and cannot harm her. Iron mocks him and calls him an idiot while beheading him with her sword. But this reveals the true protagonist underneath the armor, and she says it's ironic that the Holy Spirit embraced an undead, so now she has more reasons to kill him. And she orders the soldiers to capture him, and with their attacks, they destroy his armor. Iron steps forward and with a single blow, she cuts off one of the protagonist's arms while stating that the undead are more fragile than she thought. The cat tells him once again that if he doesn't defend himself seriously, he will die. But the protagonist remains steadfast in his response, which is a resounding no. So Iron tells him that he is very honest, and since he respects his oath so much, then he should do as he says, and go to hell. The protagonist asks the girl if she really wants to kill him, and she asks if he was afraid of dying. So the protagonist begins to open his clothes and tells her that if she desires to kill him so much, she should strike his chest, because as soon as the fire of his soul extinguishes, he will disappear completely. This annoys Iron, and she asks if he thinks she won't dare to kill him, and she lunges at him but stops at the last moment. and the protagonist tells her that of course, he believes so because it would go against the agreement of the Grey Tunics to do anything to him without permission. And if she won't do it, then it's his turn because no matter who she is, he won't allow her to insult his lady or invade his mind again. So the protagonist ignites his soul, and Iron says it was a big mistake. There, the real Iron wakes up the protagonist and he asks if she's okay because she wasn't responding. The protagonist says yes and asks about the fog, but she tells him that it was clear all day, and maybe it was a dream. So they prepare to rest in the nearby village, and the protagonist wonders what is happening. Then we see the cliff behind them, where a demon named Zelda mocks her companion, named Tarvia, for burning herself with the protagonist's soul, and she tells him to shut up. Then Zelda says that the protagonist turned out to be more determined than they expected, and they don't understand where he came from. Zelda asks if they should expose him, and she says yes, because it would be perfect to corrupt him and make him expose himself. There they see Catherine has returned, so they have to leave, and although Zelda says she could kill her with one hand, they can't break the truce. Once in the village, Catherine meets with the protagonist and tells him that she has good and bad news. The protagonist asks for the good news first, and she tells him that the Holy Spirit has approved her as his guardian angel, so it has also recognized him as a paladin. But the bad news is that she cannot reveal his identity, and if this happens and humans pursue him, not only will they disown him, but they will deny everything he has done and launch a crusade against him. Although if he manages to reveal it and the humans don't attack him, everyone would be happy. And she apologizes because that's the most she could achieve for him. But this doesn't affect the protagonist, and he thanks Catherine for her hard work. She approaches to caress his head while telling him that he is very young and optimistic. When she feels something strange and asks the protagonist why he has demon essence, we see the arrival of Iron and her group in the capital, where the citizens gaze at them in astonishment. But the protagonist looks at them suspiciously. There, we see Catherine explaining to him that their encounter in the fog was the work of demons, and the protagonist tells her not to worry, as they weren't that strong and he managed to drive them away. But she reminds him of the treaty of non-interference between liches, angels, and demons, thanks to which the demons cannot use force against him, so they will try to tempt him and distort his faith, just like they did with other paladins in the past. But the protagonist tells her that he will not be corrupted no matter the temptation, and Catherine believes in him. But she warns him to be careful with humans, as demons can pretend to be one in order to approach indirectly. The protagonist asks her how he can distinguish demonic followers, but the angel tells him it is very difficult, so he must be alert to anyone who approaches with suspicious intentions. The king receives Iron's delegation, mentioning the protagonist first and then her. While both kneel before him and exchange greetings, he says that he is not yet a king until the coronation, which is why he requested the protagonist's presence to witness the ceremony. The king approaches the protagonist and says he cannot allow a paladin to demean himself in that way. But Iron tells him that she is also a herald of the Becher Duchy, so she is still his subject and he should bow to her. But the king tells her that title is too little for a paladin. Iron realizes that he is testing her and can't believe he is so indiscriminate, so she simply agrees with him. And he thinks the girl knows how to read the room as he turns around and tells them that the welcoming party has been waiting for them. The protagonist wonders if he is a herald, but the cat tells him that the king doesn't care about that, as his problem is with Iron. Perhaps because she ruined his father, and although he doesn't know for sure, his attitude towards her is very obvious. Then the protagonist figures it out, and it must be because the king is a demonic follower. So he charges his power to kill him, but an invisible force stops him. And we see that it's Catherine, who explains to him that a follower is a bad person. But not all bad people are followers, and now he is a paladin, and his actions represent the order and the Holy Spirit, while the king represents the kingdom of Isaac. Therefore, if he carelessly does something against him, everyone will think it's a direct order from the Holy Spirit. And if his innocence is proven, it would mean that the Spirit declared war against an innocent nation. So the only way to act against him would be to unmask him as a demonic follower. And the protagonist says he understands, so he will then tear off that mask he's wearing, frustrating Catherine. The protagonist and Iron arrive at the ball during the night, where attendees speculate that the protagonist must be her lover, as there is no other way for a paladin to willingly submit to a small duchy. This annoys the girl. Then the king welcomes Iron's delegation and asks if the girl will perform the first dance. She agrees, and the protagonist wonders why she left him alone again, to which the cat tells him it's normal and he must learn to fend for himself. And the protagonist says it's okay, as he already has experience with dancing and hurries to find Shelley. The protagonist is about to go to her when a girl stands in his way. But it doesn't last long, as another girl immediately pushes her aside and introduces herself. And then another girl behind her asks him for a dance. Suddenly, the protagonist finds himself surrounded by girls fighting over dancing with him, which scares him. They approach him and cling to him, which begins to overwhelm him until he finally explodes. And he shouts that he will only dance with Shelly, which suddenly turns all the attention of the people towards the girl and her family. This annoys her greatly, and she asks the protagonist if he has any dispute with her. But he says he just wants to dance with her, so she angrily agrees. And she pulls him to do a quick and intense dance with the protagonist in the female role. So she tells him that he's very good, and she asks him to stop fooling around. This surprises the king and embarrasses Iron. He asks her if no one has seen her face, to which the girl replies that no one, not even herself, has seen it. And the king says it doesn't matter, as girls will always be attracted to him. But Iron says she doesn't understand what he means. So the king takes her to another room to talk, where he says he wants to make a deal with her to ask for a man. And she understands that he's referring to the protagonist. He tells her she's very clever, and that although the protagonist is his subject, he knows he is loyal to her, so he wants them to sever ties and swear loyalty to him. She says it's not something she can decide on her own, so the king offers her territories to make her duchy more prosperous. But after she refuses again, the king changes tactics, and he asks her if she doesn't want to possess the protagonist once and for all. Iron says she doesn't understand what he's referring to, but the king asks her not to pretend to be confused, because the story of a knight clad in sacred light facing an army to save her sounds very romantic. So surely her heart was shaken, and moreover, everyone sees them as a couple. However, she also knows that she can't do anything because she is his lady, and getting married would ruin both of their reputations, which would be fatal for her duchy, but now he offers her an opportunity. The king explains that the prestige of the royalty hit rock bottom after the battle, which caused the kingdom of Alan to start moving, but many troops no longer follow their orders. She tells him that if there were an invasion, she would stand by his side, but the king says that a promise means nothing, because that's what caused her father's betrayal. So what he needs is a loyal paladin to him, and he asks her to imagine a scenario where a paladin becomes a hero in a battle against the enemy country. Upon his return, he proposes marriage to the unattainable girl, and instead of opposing, everyone will applaud and bless them. This frustrates Iron, and the king says that everyone wins. Then we see Shelly tired after dancing, wondering why the other girls keep looking at her, and she thinks they wouldn't dare to be so bold without the king's consent. So she is bearing the disdain instead of Iron, so she will have to blackmail her at another time. Shelly asks the protagonist why he wants to dance with her, and the protagonist tells her it's because he has only danced with her before, and he's afraid of ruining it. So Shelly understands and asks him to come closer to tell him something. The king warns Iron that Gregory allied with her because of the connection between the protagonist and the church, and it will be difficult for her to control the duchy as long as he is alive. And that's why he invited him to the capital, so that she could keep an eye on him. Shelly warns the protagonist not to accept invitations that are not from Iron, as it is a test from the king to separate him from her. And she explains that it's because he wants to be on good terms with the church to stabilize his reign, where paladins are needed, and the church will soon ask the protagonist to leave Iron and join the king. So Shelly asks him if he will obey them or the sacred spirit. So he asks Catherine if that's what the spirit wants. She tells him that the spirit prefers believers to think for themselves. So the protagonist tells her that he's sure the spirit doesn't want him to break his vows, and more importantly, to have demons among them. To which the angel agrees. We see a third demon arrive with the pair, who tells them that it's rare for them to ask for help. And upon seeing Catherine, he asks them if even a second-class angel can dissuade them. They tell him to be careful not to confront her, but as he jumps, he tells them not to worry because someone like her can't stop him. And Catherine can sense a terrifying aura as he passes by. Back at the mansion, Gregory knocks on Iron's door and informs her that it's urgent. So she opens the door and asks him to come in, and he notices that she is still in her dress because she hasn't slept all night. Gregory enters and tells her about the movements of the Kingdom of Alan and how the king asked Duke Downers to send troops to the border. But the Duke refused, and it's just a piece of news from 15 days ago that she hadn't heard about until 4 days ago due to a blockade. He also mentions that since the royal prestige is so low, the king must be seeking the support of the church, so he fears that he might go after the protagonist. And Iron tells him about her conversation with the king the previous night. This surprises Gregory because he has already taken action, and he asks where the protagonist is, to which she responds that the archbishop invited him to a religious service. The count asks her if she's comfortable with letting him go alone, but she tells him not to worry because she's not. We see the protagonist and Shelley arrive at the cathedral, where he is surprised that she was invited. And we see that the previous night Iron sneaked into his room to ask him the favor, so he thinks about eventually getting revenge. There, Pastor Dean comes out to greet them and leads them to the Archbishop, who welcomes them to the cathedral. But he asks about Iron's absence, and Shelley explains that the Duchess didn't feel well during the night, so she sent Shelley as her representative. This makes the religious officials nervous, who suspect the girl, but the Archbishop tells them to calm down, and he recognizes Shelley as Iron's spokesperson, so he lets them pass. Upon learning that she sent her granddaughter, Gregory explodes against Iron, but she explains that the king and the church tried to use emotional manipulation against her, so she had to make it clear that she won't interfere, and it's solely the protagonist's decision. That's why she sent Shelley, because she knows how to help the protagonist deal with the words of the cunning old foxes. Gregory tells her that she's only 16 years old, but Iron responds that it's what he wanted. A relationship between Shelley and the protagonist to make him a member of their house, so she must assume the risks. So the Count gives in and asks her if she can really let go of the protagonist. But she tells him that it doesn't matter, because if she had transferred the protagonist to the king based on her feelings, it would have been a betrayal against him. Back at the cathedral, the protagonist is surprised by the architecture and the runes in the place, and Shelley explains that their standards are naturally higher than in other places. Then they stop in front of a huge painting that Shelley recognizes. It depicts Abbotsald, a saint who was executed by the mafia, and the Archbishop tells the story of how Abbotsald defended a radical religious reform that offended commoners and nobility. So the church gave up protecting him, and it wasn't until centuries later that the issue was forgotten, and the church managed to restore its reputation. Shelley mentions that it's ironic that the Holy Spirit gave up on protecting a devout follower, and the religious official says it's because the Holy Spirit favors the people of the world over the saints, which Shelley mocks, and the Archbishop understands that the conversation won't go so well. In a scene change, we see Catherine swiftly traversing the city. She stops on a rooftop and says that she lost someone, so she asks the air why they're not revealing themselves. The demon asks her if she can't sense their aura, and the angel says she can't if it's hidden. But the demon wasn't hiding it, so she tells Catherine that she'll reveal herself if she admits she can't find her. Catherine then does so, and the demon appears right in front of her, introducing herself as Vivian. Catherine tries to back away, but she stumbles on the roof and falls to the ground, so Vivian taunts her and says she won't eat her. The angel asks her if she was the one who attacked the protagonist, but Vivian responds that she wasn't, because she was just assigned that task, in which they will be colleagues, and she says she'll become the protagonist's demon guardian. Catherine draws her sword ready to fight, but Vivian asks her if she wants to break the truce with the demons as a representative of the celestial realm, and the girl is left speechless. Shelley and the Archbishop argue about the role of saints in the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. We see the protagonist confused, and the cat asks him if he understands anything, but he replies that they speak worse than the cleric. Shelley argues that saints should be taken as an example of the world's folly, or else they will end up crucified like Abbotsald. The Archbishop denies this. The protagonist wonders how long they will keep arguing, because he just wants to go out into the streets to preach chivalry. Both sides present their arguments about what a paladin should be. The church says that a paladin should protect it, while Shelley says he should adhere to his oath of loyalty. They ask the protagonist which statement he believes is correct. He hesitates and asks the cat if he should give his opinion, but the cat tells him no and suggests he ask his guardian angel instead. But the protagonist says he doesn't know where his guardian angel is since the previous night, so the cat suggests he simply stop the discussion to avoid offending anyone. The cat tells them both that he needs to think before giving an answer. The Archbishop then asks if he doesn't want to have a role in spreading the faith, but the protagonist responds that he needs to think about it, which leaves the Archbishop astonished. The protagonist explains that his actions represent the Holy Spirit, so he must be careful with what he says and does. This further perplexes the religious official, while Shelley mocks him. She tells him to think carefully in that case, and she will wait for his response. Finally, the pair leave the church, and Shelley is relieved that the protagonist's words were so useful. He asks her why she was arguing with the Archbishop. She explains that it's because of what he told her about the religious official wanting to leave Iron and serve the king. And since she is the spokesperson for the Duchess, she had to fight with him. The protagonist finally understands that it's not good for them to be involved. This pleases Shelley, but at the same time, she's still upset because they made her wake up early in the winter, so the protagonist offers to treat her to dessert and buy her clothes as compensation. The girl accepts, although the protagonist says he will resist temptation even if it's her. The archbishop watches them from the window and asks if the girl is connected to the protagonist. But the cleric denies it and says it must be an act by Irene to show that she's not concerned about being the protagonist's lady for life or being with other girls. The archbishop finds this problematic and says that a paladin who can't be controlled is something terrible. He instructs the cleric to speak with the protagonist to convince him. The protagonist leaves Shelley at her house while she thinks that she has a feeling of wanting to protect and caress him. The protagonist returns to his room, where he encounters Vivian accompanying her friends. He attacks her before she can finish speaking. She tries to reason with him, but the protagonist keeps attacking her relentlessly, so she uses Catherine as a human shield. She causes the protagonist to accidentally hit Catherine, making her spit blood, so the angel asks them to calm down. Vivian says that she is calm, and the protagonist is the aggressive one, and he says that together they can defeat the demon. But she responds that they can't do it because of the truce between their realms, and while licking Catherine's blood, she asks him if he wants to break it. So the protagonist asks why they would make such an agreement if they should fight against the forces of evil. Both girls explain that they used to think the same way, but they fought for 10,000 years without anyone winning the war. Although Vivian says she wouldn't mind if he wants to break the agreement and fight with her, and she uses her power to anchor the protagonist to the ground, rendering him defenseless. But then Catherine grabs her by the horns, and Vivian explains that she is not there to bother him but to become his demon guardian. The protagonist says he doesn't accept it, but Vivian tells him that it's his chance to try to convert a demon to the light. She gives him the example of how he became a paladin, and that nowhere is it written that demons can't defend the light. The protagonist says it makes sense, and then the cat emerges from his armor and tells him not to believe her, because he approached the light through faith, while she only approached to tempt him to fall. But then Vivian lifts the cat in the air and tells him that demons have no truce with ghosts. So the cat changes his stance and supports the demon girl's point. But then Catherine also reminds him that angels have no truce with ghosts either. And the cat wonders why he ended up involved in that deadly game and that he just wants to be a small honest kitten. In the end, Catherine suggests to the protagonist to let her stay, as it's better to keep her close than not knowing where she is. And if he can convince her, then she's free to try. So the protagonist agrees to let her stay, on the condition that she won't do anything to harm others. He gives the example of vampire children who now only drink pig's blood, and Vivian says that's good. The protagonist agrees to have her as his demon guardian, but since she insists, she must act alongside him from now on. This entails praying before meals, going to church every weekend, and attending Catherine's lessons on divine faith every night. The protagonist tells her that he knows her goal is to make him fall, so it will be a race between them to either make him fall or convince her to ascend. But he won't listen to a word she says if she doesn't accept. She tries to wriggle free by saying that the Holy Spirit might be angry that a demon is going to church to pray. But the protagonist tells her that there's no problem, as his whole group prays on weekends, and the spirit is fine with that. And Catherine tells her that the spirit would be pleased if a demon accepted baptism. So the protagonist asks her if she wants to join his warm family. Annoyed, she eventually agrees. In a scene change, one of the clerics informs the king that the archbishop couldn't convince the protagonist. He turned out to be resistant to their proposal, and they will resolve it as soon as possible. The king asks how much time that is, but the cleric doesn't have a date, which angers the king. And he tells them that they only have until the coronation ceremony, which is in 2 days. And if he can't announce the paladin's loyalty by then, he won't support the church's reform. The cleric says it's very little time, and the protagonist seems to have returned to his room angry, making it more difficult to convince him. But the king shouts that it's their problem, and if it's not enough that he's willing to accept the reform, while it took them 20 years with his father. So he tells the cleric to go back to the archbishop and tell him they only have 2 days to accomplish it. The cleric leaves, and the king's wife appears, telling him to be patient, just as they were to obtain the crown. But he tells her they have no more years to wait and must do something. Otherwise, not only the crown will be in danger, but the entire country. She tells him that all possible successors to the throne have been eliminated. But the king responds that he is worried about Irene, because she has all the elements to become a strong candidate for the throne. In a scene change, we see the palace stables, where the caretakers are unable to tame the protagonist's horse, and the king's horse is in danger alongside him, so they sent someone specific to take care of it. It's a child who sees that the protagonist has already tamed the king's horse, and he scolds the others because it's Sunday and no horse prays like he does. So from that day on, they must pray every Sunday, just like they did before eating grass, and everyone agrees, which surprises the child. Then we move to the streets of the city, where a drunken man encounters the depressed Vivian in an alley. He sees her clothes and blushes, so he approaches and tells her it's not safe for children to be alone at night. He takes her arm and tells her to go to his house, which is big and warm. This angers the girl, and with a strike from her book, she sends him flying, saying that she's just defending herself. And she jumps to hit him while remembering that Catherine tasked her with memorizing a whole chapter of the sacred book. She will have to recite it in full, and Catherine will examine her the next day. That's why she's angry, because the man interrupted her studies. The next day, the protagonist opens the curtains of the room and says they should practice the spirit of chivalry in the streets of the capital. Although he doubts if doing something else would be better, Vivian tells him no, that practicing is true devotion. And she says they should go outside to spread faith, or else their efforts, now that she has memorized the entire book, will be in vain. This astonishes Catherine. The protagonist heads towards the door, saying that if they cower because of a conspiracy, no one will take responsibility for making the world a better place. But when he opens it, he realizes the king is right outside, so he gets scared and closes the door in his face. The protagonist asks Vivian if that was her doing, but she says she has no connection to the king. Although the protagonist insists that he is the envoy of the demon she summoned, she says she doesn't even know him. This leaves the protagonist confused, who spies through the crack in the door and wonders if she really isn't a demonic follower. Outside, the king wonders if the protagonist doesn't want to see him. One of his subjects believes he might be surprised, but the ruler says that's no reason to shut the door on the king. So the protagonist peeks out and asks if he is the king. But when the king confirms it, he closes the door again, saying that something doesn't feel right about the situation. Desperate, the king opens the door, saying he has something to ask him, while Catherine and Vivian observe without understanding what is happening. The king apologizes for entering his room but was in a bit of a hurry, and he says he went to invite him to watch a knight's play with him, because he heard that the protagonist likes Knight's novels, and he says the Capitol Theater has some plays based on novels. The protagonist finds it interesting and thinks that he could discover if the king is good or not if they watch the play together, so he accepts the invitation. In the play, a count slaps the knight for contradicting him, but the knight says he will never apologize to the forces of evil. In the stands, the protagonist is upset by the treatment of the knight, while we see Catherine and Vivian enjoying it at the back. They say it's a much more interesting play than the celestial drama and demon stories combined. The play ends, and the actors thank them for watching it. The protagonist applauds and says he is moved because he never imagined seeing the plot of the novel live. Then the king says there is a surprise for him and snaps his fingers. With this, a man enters the theater and asks if he heard that there was someone who wanted to ask him about his writing, and he gets scared by the people present. And the protagonist recognizes him as Turtle, the author of the novel on which the play was based. So he shakes his hand with excitement, saying he is his fan. And the king tells him that's right, so the author gets scared that he is a paladin. And the king then asks him to write a novel specifically for him, where the protagonist will be the main character, so he can give advice on the story he has in mind. And Turtle will write it, and that's his gift to him. The protagonist asks if it's possible, and the writer says it is if he pays for it. In a scene change, Abby informs Irene about the various invitations she has received from the nobles, reaching up to 32. Gregory mentions that all the influential nobles are mobilizing in the capital around the Becher Duchy, and that all the invitations fall within the time before the coronation, and none of them include the royal family on the list. So Irene asks for Gregory's opinion, and the man tells her it's the eve before the storm, and if he hadn't been there with her, he would have also sent her an invitation to examine her attitude and see if she wants to protect the throne or seek revenge against the crown. So the girl thinks that the nobles must be looking for the same thing, and Gregory asks her what stance she will take. And that's how the third part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to get here, so comment the word Paladin in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.